word that I have mentioned there, that means free verse. Poets were more and more experimenting with their content, with their method, with their content as well as manner. Poetry was undergoing a sea change. People were now taking liberty with the traditional forms of poetry. Meters were gradually loosening, and the rhythmical or rhyme scheme, they were gradually giving way to run-on lines. So many things were happening in the sphere of poetry, both, as I said, in content as well as in manner. So we find that idea of experimentation. T.S. Eliot's The Westland is the best example of the 20th century poets' desire to find a better instrument of expression of their reality that was different from the reality that earlier writers and poets were expressing. So that we find element of experimental tendency in the 20th century. And then there was the poetry was urban, as I said. More and more people were writing about the life in urban city life. One of the critics, I don't remember the name right now, has written an article, Metropolitan and Our Idea of Culture. So that metropolitan or city, as we call it, came into the center. As I said earlier also, gradually there was this tendency to neglect it. It's all right, city is there, but it doesn't bother me. And then gradually there was that awareness. The pressures were building up on the individual, and he had to recognize it, he had to reckon it. So earlier this was, there was a rejection. From rejection, this next stage was alienation. People, a man was finding himself alienated, rootless. He didn't have any identity in the city mass. The mass, the otherness of the mass was horrifying, terrifying, and the man was terrified. And that we find in the poetry of the modern age, and that we find in T.S. Eliot also. As I referred to the element of experimentation, and that we find in as I said, in content also. For instance, the jug of the machines, or the day-to-day routine, motor cars, horns, honking, traffic jams, this found expression in poetry. These subjects were formerly thought to be beyond poetry or outside poetry, but now the poets were writing about these aspects of human life. So a new reality was being expressed in the poetry during the 20th century. Before we go to the Westland, I think it would be pertinent to take a look at the dramas of T.S. Eliot's, plays of T.S. Eliot, and how he looks at drama. Drama he wrote in the later phase of his life, and there is a sense of continuity. There is a sense of progression in the way T.S. Eliot had experimented with his form. Formerly he wrote poetry, and then he surprisingly he is better known as a poet today, but during the last 20 years of his career, he did not write poetry at all, and he diverted his energy for drama. So poetry is an indirect form of expression. From there he switches over to drama, and he thought that he would need to have a medium that is more direct, more where he has a direct sort of communication with the reader. So there we find that. I have, as I said, Dr. Kinger with me, and he would now talk about the dramas of T.S. Eliot, and he would throw some light on the dramatic works of T.S. Eliot. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Pandya. I should skip the part of the introduction, but I'm tempted to pick up one thread that you left in between was that you mentioned that multifaceted personality as
Yeah.
T.S. Eliot was. I am here to draw a kind of analogy. Uh, I personally feel that versatility, multifacetedness is a kind of a rarity, and literary versatility is still more rarer. And in the Orient, we find an example in the name of Sri Rabindranath Tagore, a poet laureate of 1913. And to equate that experience, we can find a parallel in the name of, say, T.S. Eliot,
Yeah.
who was also a poet laureate of 1948. A poet, a critic, a dramatist, all bundled into one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm here to dwell on his dramas, but that would not suffice. And therefore, I have chosen a title that is T.S. Eliot, a playwright at par with his poetry. You can see that on the slide. A playwright at par with his poetry. So while evaluating Eliot's works, we come across a lot of poetry in his drama also. And while studying his drama, we are not far from poetry. Of course, his contribution in criticism, his contribution in poetry is much talked about, but his drama, his singular fame rests with one drama, Murder in the Cathedral. I, I feel that he was a church's favorite son. Church solicited his help in bringing about religiosity among people. So he wrote a few drama on the calling of a church. For instance, The Rock, Murder in the Cathedral. These two were the prominent examples of drama written after the request of the church, Catholic Church especially. So here, in these two plays, they are also written in verse form. And in these two plays, he dwells upon the themes of religiosity, spiritualism, the meanings of human existence and death. And he calls upon people to look on those issues in a different manner. These two plays were much discussed about among the people. But then, after his plays, The Family Reunion, The Cocktail Party, The Confidential Clerk, and The Elder Statesman, these plays are also very famous, and it's a rich corpus of literature, we may say, even in the realm of drama, the genre drama. They are very near to the poetry. Of course, the later plays, The Family Reunion, The Cocktail Party, they look much mundane. Their appeal is little bit commercial. A kind of commercial appeal is there to entertain people at large. These are the issues discussed, modern issues, as earlier Professor Pandya discussed, that urban issues are there. Most of his dramas deal with urban issues, the meanings of death, the meanings of existence. All these dramas, they discuss religiosity at length. So these later part dramas, Confidential Clerk, The Elder Statesman, they are much more, they have the thrust on the, say, mundane, materialistic life. And I think Eliot, as he excels in his poetry, as his fame is there with the wasteland, Ash Wednesday, we may say, the same issues, the same kind of things are discussed in a dramatic genre. The final appeal of all these dramas, maybe there is ash in the wasteland, but we also hear that human being is ending not with a bang but in a whimper. All these things are there. But of course, there is a kind of hope where he says in the wasteland as Shanti, 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 or Datta Dvaidvam. So I think he takes his drama to the height of poetry as well. He lifts the scenario of the drama where a layman as well as the elite of literature, they both understand the meanings, the religiosity at par. And he has used this medium to discuss all these things very nicely. So today's thrust is poetry itself, and therefore I am here to dwell on the drama, but there is not much time for all the discussions that may issue afterwards. But I would request now again Professor
Yes,
Pandya and Professor
I
Kakkar.
was just wondering if we may say that his dramas are a logical extension of his
Yeah,
creative
true.
urge that is reflected in poetry in the earlier part,
True.
and then he finds this medium of drama more direct and pertinent. So he reverts to drama, and his dramas, as you said, are poetic drama. They are an extension of his poetic practice. So in that sense, there is a clear progression that we find in the literary career of T.S. Eliot. One
And
more thing that you
one
say.
thing I should mention here
Yes.
is that he had a very fine ear for music.
Yes,
And he was much attracted to jazz kind of music, and
Yes, yes.
Sweeney is outcome of that jazz
Yes.
thing, jazz music, and he uses this medium in all of his dramas because his drama are written in verse. He tries to lift it to the say modicum of jazz, say to the level of jazz, and he tries to give that, he sound that kind of music to the public at large.
Yes, yes. So that melody we find in his poetry also, and that we find in his drama. So same strain runs throughout his literary career. And one more thing that I was talking about, and that you referred to in your talk, is that there is a progression. As you said, religious element in the earlier plays, and then that concern for spiritual barrenness. That we find a clear progression right from the beginning to the end in the literary career of T.S. Eliot. Earlier, in the earlier part of his career, there seems to be a sort of pessimism. And the Westland is an example of his pessimistic view, where he finds that there is no hope of resurrection for the Western European civilization. And then gradually he moves, he progresses to a state of mind where he thinks that yes, there may be some possibility of resurrection. And in his plays we find that that expression of his of that hope for resurrection for modern man. So from an agnostics that we find in the earlier part of his career to a religious believer, and then in his plays we definitely find that Eliot is now converted, a different person altogether. That steady gradual development, progression, we can very well notice in the course of his literary career. In the earlier part, for instance, in Love Song of J. Prufrock, we find that the protagonist is not able even to articulate his question, to articulate his doubt. He is frustrated, and he doesn't dare to, we may say, articulate his doubt, and he hesitates, and he never succeeds in it. Then the next stage comes in the Westland. The protagonist is able to articulate, face the eternal problem, the eternal dilemma, and then we find this development, progression, and ultimately the religious place. So from agnostics to a believer, that kind of progression we find in T.S. Eliot. We have to hurriedly move to the another part of his of our talk, and that is Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. I have with me Professor Bansriben Kakkar, and she will throw light on Alfred Prufrock.
When we refer the title The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock, it comes,
Yes.
yes. So the poem was, we find in the collection of Prufrock and other observations. The year is 1917, and we refer the title we may say that unconsciously T.S. Eliot might have chosen the title. That is from a furniture wholesaler firm where he was born and bred, he might have. And another source is that is in a short story, the reference of that Prufrock. That story is written by Henry James, where the description of the man is, he is a middle-aged man. T.S. Eliot has also portrayed the man here. He is in his 40s, or at least he wears clothes as if he is in his 40s. As the title is the love song, there is neither the love nor the song. And we see that when he thinks to offer or when he wants to propose, he is not able to propose the lady. In the end of the poem too, we see that he is recalling his past, where he was quite young. He had been there at the seashore and he had seen so many beautiful girls and mermaids, but now no more is there. So recalling of the past is there, but we see together that he is indecisive and he has not that much of the courage to propose. So as we have referred, gradual progression, in this poem the hero is quite unheroic, while as we have referred the drama by T.S. Eliot, we see Harry from the family reunion. He finally decides to have his spiritual pilgrimage. Here we see no reference of the spiritual pilgrimage is there. The only thing is that man is able to do nothing. Though we live in the modern age, ours is the modern civilization, but man is actually unable to do what he wants to do, and at the age of 40 he finds that he is capable of doing nothing, he can do nothing, and this here has been expressed by T.S. Eliot in this poem. The words J. Alfred might have been added by T.S. Eliot. Prufrock is the name, but J. Alfred, I think it is harsh